So first I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. I know it's a very crazy time of year in higher education and a very crazy year. And so I thank you for taking the time to join us today. I think we've got a great conversation today that's really relevant as things start to continue to change for us and we continue to adapt and adjust to this new world that we're in. It's more important now than ever that we have an effective way of communicating with prospective students and that we're meeting them with the messaging that they want and need. So that's what our conversation is going to be about today. Amanda, if you can just move forward one slide. So for those of you who might not know everything about education dynamics, we are an organization that helps universities and colleges guide students throughout the entire life cycle. What we're going to be focusing on quite a bit today is engagement with prospective students, but we do everything from market research, identifying the programs that are going to make sense and the students that might make sense for your programs, through inquiry generation, marketing, enrollment management, and retention. So if you'd like to learn more about the services that we offer, we'd be happy to have a conversation with you. We've got a number of different services. Amanda, if you want to go forward one more slide and then another. We're happy to have a conversation with you. Please feel free to get in touch with either myself or Chris or Amanda or someone from our team, and we'll be happy to fill you in a little bit more about the marketing agency services that we offer, the engagement services, enrollment management, and market research. So, okay, so I'd like to take a minute to introduce Amanda and Chris. They are both higher education experts. They are both very experienced in engaging prospective and current students, recruiting the right students to the right programs, and making sure that those students are a good fit for the programs that they're enrolling in. Amanda is our Senior Director of Enrollment Management. She's been in higher education for over 12 years. She worked at a number of colleges and universities before joining Education Dynamics and does a great job managing and guiding our enrollment team. Chris is our Vice President of Enrollment Management. He spent his entire career in higher education and is an expert in engaging prospective students. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Amanda here and let them get started. One thing that I would say is if you have questions as we're going, please feel free to put them in the Q&A area or in the chat. Q&A works very well. We'll be stopping throughout, so please don't wait until the end. We will have a session at the end to address them, but if you have an immediate question, put it in there and we'll get to it as quickly as we can. We want to make this as engaging as possible. Okay, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started today with discussing the objectives that we're going to cover. What is a contact strategy? First of all, we're going to discuss what goes into an effective contact strategy, how to evaluate your own contact strategy, and then tips and recommendations to consider when creating a contact strategy. Let's take a moment and do a thought activity that's going to require you to think about a purchase or a consumer decision that you made in the past few months that required you to engage with the company that you were considering purchasing from. And this doesn't have to be a higher ed experience. So I'm going to walk through this example with Chris Gilmore and role play to give you an idea of what we mean. Chris, can you give us an example of how you engaged with a company?
Yes, I'm going to use a fairly recent, last 6 months example of when I decided to buy a house and needed to engage with an actual realtor to get that process started. So the first step that I took there was on a specific house that I was interested in getting more information on. And as I wasn't working with a specific realtor at the time, I reached out to the individual that was linked to that house via email first with a number of questions about the property.
Okay. And in reaching out via email, what were your expectations regarding getting a response to your initial inquiry?
Pretty high. I'm like most of us probably, by the time I'm, requesting information about a house, I've probably looked at every potential publicly available statistic on it and neighborhood and everything like that on Zillow. So by the time I was ready to ask some more specific questions, I wanted the information right away. So I was hoping for a quick response.
Okay. And when you define quick, how quickly is quick?
I mean, I would have liked an instantaneous response, but I'm a little bit more realistic. But quick, I mean, definitely same day.
And how did your expectations line up with the outcome?
Good. In this particular case, she responded very quickly, like less than a half hour.
Wonderful. And would you say that the process that you went through impacted your decision regarding purchasing from the company in any way?
It did. That house didn't end up staying on my list, but we actually really loved that first couple of experiences with getting information from that individual. We did end up working with that realtor over the course of our house hunt.
Thank you for sharing. So I'd like everyone to think about this experience and think about your own experience that you have over the last couple of months and how the experience translates to the post-traditional students' experience with higher education. What expectations do you think have become normative for this population, and are we delivering on these expectations? Okay, let's get started with the basics and discuss and define what a contact strategy actually is. A contact strategy is a strategy for responding to inquiries from prospective students as they come in, following up for a specific amount of time across multiple mediums until that prospect is contacted or put into a nurturing strategy. Okay, so when we acknowledge that making that initial contact is our first biggest challenge, and until we actually make that initial contact, we don't even have an opportunity to work to convert an application. So let's discuss why making contact quickly is critical. The example that's shown here shows a Google search where we typed in online degrees in Cincinnati, Ohio. But what we see in the example is that there are actually no examples of colleges that come up when we search Cincinnati, Ohio. So when it comes to the post-traditional online space, the main players in the game know the critical impact of moving quickly and getting in contact with prospective students quickly. They invest heavily in the ability to respond and engage prospects. So whether you think you're in direct competition with the large online players or not, if you want to recruit post-traditional students, you are in competition with them. The average post-traditional student requests information from 1 to 3 institutions, and half of them enroll with the first one that they speak with. So while the statistics on speed to lead speak to how likely a prospect is to convert with the first school that engages them, it's also important to keep in mind that 50% of undergraduate students and 43% of graduate students do not go to the first school that connects with them. So this is also evidence to support and the reason why that connecting with every single prospect that engages with you is critical. So even if you're not the first to make that initial contact, which hopefully you are, you still have an opportunity to convert. A couple of things that we want to think about. How fast does your institution respond to new inquiries? How long and at what cadence do you follow up? And at what mediums do you use to engage prospective students? I'm going to turn it over to Chris Gilmore to talk more about contact strategy basics.
Well, thanks, Amanda. So we want to start with defining a couple of terms that we'll reference in the upcoming slides. These are things that we use when we talk about contact strategies a lot. So you've already heard us reference cadence. So cadence we use to refer to how quickly we respond to prospective students, but also how often we're reaching out to them throughout the contact strategy and for how long we're choosing to reach out to prospective students throughout the contact strategy. Messaging, pretty self-explanatory there, but it's really what we want our prospects to know what are the points that we're trying to include in all of our attempting contact emails or things like that. Medium, which you've heard Amanda reference, but that's just simply, what medium are we using to try to reach prospective students? So is that a phone call, an email, a text message, things like that. The call to action, what action are we encouraging the prospective student to take as a result of this contact attempt? At the highest level, it is simply to respond to us, either answer the phone, maybe respond to email, respond to a text, and ultimately the call to action is to move forward with an application and enrollment. And then goals. We all know what goals are. Our ultimate goal is to turn prospective students into applicants and enrollments. But there are a number of goals that are important along the path of a contact strategy that are that come up much before we actually get to the opportunity to convert that student. So things like contact rates, open rates, click-through rates, things like that we want to be able to know where our current performance is in order to make a realistic goal for the contact strategy there. So to start with, we wanted to just show a really basic visual on what a potential contact strategy might look like and include some of the basic concepts here. So one of the things that you'll see that we would encourage is a contact strategy is multiple days long. As you know, we already covered that when an adult post-traditional student chooses to request information from an institution like yours, they've already done some research or they wouldn't have gotten to the point of RFI. And you likely meet a number of their criteria, or again, they wouldn't give you the opportunity to connect with them. And so we want to respond very quickly. And you see that day one, right when the student completes the web form or the RFI, you have a call and a follow-up email. But we also know from experience that just because, post-traditional student John submits request for information at 12 p.m. on Thursday, if you call them at 12:02, he may have already moved on to something else and may not get to that very first call. And that's why it's really important that we continue to work a variety of mediums over a prolonged period of time in order to successfully engage the post-traditional student. So what's important is that you look at what's realistic for you in terms of a timeline and how long you can keep up with attempting to contact a student, and that you're consistently working a variety of mediums. So you see in this one, we have the basics of phone calls as well as emails attempting to contact that student. In this particular example, that contact attempt, that automation runs for about 10 days. And then at the 11th day, which happens with a lot of institutions, we move them into kind of a more automated email nurturing campaign to try to engage them over the long term. On the right side, we just have some examples of some of the goals or benchmarks that you might associate with some of these points of a contact strategy. So if you're sending automated emails throughout your contact attempt strategy, you might look at things like open rate, your click rate, how much are they actually engaging with the content that's in your emails, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. And then obviously our goal, which is contacting these prospective students. So what is the overall contact rate associated with the campaign? So Cadence, we've talked about that a couple of times already, and we wanted to talk a little bit because a lot of our partner institutions will ask us, well, what is the right cadence? In bold, you see speed to lead. So a quick, rapid response. And we feel a little bit passionate about that, as you've already heard multiple times during this, but it is so critical, not only to respond to the students, but to respond to them as close to real time from the time that they submit that request for information as possible. I also want to pause and take a minute to talk a little bit more about speed to lead, because we often hear come up from potential partners, current partners at some of our conferences, well, I don't want to contact them too quickly, and maybe I'll appear too aggressive, or maybe I might freak prospective students out if I actually call them, email them, text them, within a minute, 2 minutes right after they come into their request for information to our institution. And what we typically respond and encourage you to think about is that's really a higher ed specific mentality, but I don't think that there's any market basis for that. As Amanda talked about earlier, the larger players really understand that the market expectation for post-traditional students is by the time they're ready to engage with your institution, they're ready to talk to you. And we would encourage, aligning our operation on that assumption and contacting them as quickly as possible, as close to real time as possible. But beyond speed to lead, there's a lot of internal factors that you want to think about when you're thinking about what a realistic and achievable contact strategy cadence is for you. So one of those is your outbound call strategy. A lot of us, some of us may have an automated contact strategy where we have an integrated soft phone into our Salesforce CRMs or whatever CRM your institution may be using, and are able to really automate a lot of that process. And if that's achievable, that's fantastic. And we're probably able to be a bit more aggressive on contact strategies. But for a lot of institutions, you are working with a manual process of responding to prospective student inquiries as they come in. And that's okay. You can definitely still set up your CRM to do that and achieve contact with that. But it's going to impact, what kind of cadence you can put into place. The other point is, what is your contact rate? One really important part about planning or replanning, relooking at your current contact strategy is, what are the current outcomes? Are they good? Are they opportunistic? Do you know what you're achieving in terms of contact rates by different sources for your leads? You really want to look at that when you're planning the cadence for your contact strategy. A third point that's really relevant that we talk a lot about here is, what's the staffing situation like? Realistically, it takes a human to run even a lot of the automated processes if we're able to have an automated phone call strategy and things like that. So it's who in your staff, whether it's admissions, enrollment office, et cetera, that's responsible for making these outbound phone calls, sending these text messages, following up to these emails. What are the responsibilities that are on their plate? Do they understand the basics and the market expectations for speed to lead? And is there an opportunity to better prioritize some of the tasks and responsibilities that are on this group of people? Another relevant point is, not everything is a phone call, and we do a lot of emails during the contact strategy. So how much quality content do you have to work with? Who in your marketing team is really helping you create that content? Do you have enough to have multiple engaging pieces of content throughout a contact strategy? I'll pause there because I see a note from you, Eric. Oh, okay, sorry. I thought you said you had a question right now. So, okay, yes, I'll pause after this slide and take some questions. And then obviously, final point, it's depending on all of the above, and that's going to look a little bit different at every single institution. What's an achievable but still aggressive contact strategy cadence for your specific institution? So on that note, I'll pause here and take any questions. Eric, do we have any questions coming in?
Thanks, Chris. We do have one question so far. How do we determine our contact rate?
That's a good question. So simply put, if you are looking at the percent of the total volume of leads that come in, if you're looking at it, for the month of August, and I got 100 leads for a given program that requested information, what percentage of those leads are moving from a new or uncontacted status with the institution into some type of contacted status? So perhaps they responded to an email with their questions and they engaged and you were able to contact them successfully via that medium, or perhaps they responded to a text message, or ideally they were able to speak with you on the phone and actually have an advising conversation with you. Any of those would be a successful contact, and that prospect would should move into some type of contacted status and be measurable there. Important note here is contact is contact. It doesn't necessarily mean that you moved someone forward into the application process. You could contact them via a response via email that said, actually, I already made a decision to go elsewhere. You still contacted them, and we want to be able to report on that as well.
Chris, related to that, do you recommend or do you currently measure your contact rate by individual mediums, or is it a holistic by the number of people that fill it in, or is it both?
Yeah, it is both. You want to measure everything that you possibly can, is always my answer to that. So medium's really important. You know, your contact rates by medium. You know, are you making the majority of your first contacts via phone? Are you having a lot of those come in via text message? If it's email, what kind of campaigns and content are driving successful email contact? And then also you want to look at it by source too. For those, you know, that are on the call that might be, you know, heavily focused in the marketing area of higher ed, we all know that not every source is created equal. So we may be getting 55, 60% contact rates on things like organic leads that come in for our program pages. And that's great, but not necessarily a benchmark that you might be able to hold out for, you know, leads that come in through paid social or something like that.
Great. Well, I know there's often questions about speed to lead and contact. So if you have any other questions about them, please enter them in here and we can certainly address them later in the conversation as well.
Thanks, Eric. So I think we've spoken to this, but just another statistic that we found through our Islanian market research, it comes to a post-traditional student's expectation of contact. And, you know, over 60% of them are coming in, and when they do request information, they're expecting contact attempts ranging anywhere from daily contact attempts to at a minimum of weekly after they submit an inquiry to the institution. So another thing that we talked about is messaging. So we're pretty passionate about messaging in the contact strategy because everything that you're driving to is an opportunity to get something about your institution in front of the prospective student. This may be a text message, might be a voicemail, might be an email. Obviously, hopefully we're having conversations and some kind of contacted interaction at some point. So you also want to plan, what are you including in terms of the messaging to the post-traditional student audience? And oftentimes when we're working with institutional partners, and we start talking about messaging, everyone is very quick to list many reasons why their program, their institution, their university brand is unique. And I affirm that. A lot of higher ed has very unique value propositions, and those are all great. When it comes to contact strategy, you really, though, do want to default to what are the biggest drivers for post-traditional student decisions. And while institutions vary and have unique value propositions, at the front end of the contact strategy, you want to default to those most common decision drivers. And across the market, you're going to see the top three really consistently are time, cost, and flexibility. So as much as possible in your content, at the attempting contact stage, you want to weave these in. How does your institution line up in these areas, and why should, if they're concerned about these 3 points, which they probably are, they should be considering your institution and wanting to respond back to you. So time is really just looking at that as, you know, how fast can they get this done? Money, pretty self-explanatory, but how much is it going to cost them? And importantly, how are they going to cover that cost while they're going through the program? And then flexibility. Obviously, post-traditional students, now more than ever, we have a lot on our plates. How are we going to fit this in without dropping any of my other balls in the area of family, job, and other obligations? Other messaging themes that you're going to have, that your institution is going to have, value propositions around transfer credit, student support, maybe you have a really strong student support system, or you have a really great programmatic accreditation for the program that you are driving contacts to. Those are fantastic, and you definitely want to weave those into your contact attempt content, but you want to prioritize these top three of time, money, and flexibility early on in your contact strategy. A lot of potential partner institutions will ask us, well, what is the right medium? You know, should I be texting? Should I be calling? You know, should I be emailing? Our answer is usually, you know, all of them. You want to be as many places as you can because post-traditional students engage in a variety of mediums on a regular basis. But by and large, most of them are coming in through a few prominent bases here. And you want to make sure that you're effectively able to cover those and cover them well. In our experience, those are phone, email, and text messaging. So spending a little bit more time on that, one of the questions that comes up is, are post-traditional students really wanting to speak on the phone? Should we be prioritizing so many outbound phone calls to prospective students? And we don't disagree with that. I put myself in post-traditional student shoes of, I use my phone more for texting and email than I do for actual phone calls. But one of the things that is specific to enrollment management, in particular, higher ed and post-traditional programs at both the undergraduate and graduate level, is typically at some point prior to the main conversion step of applying, you're going to want to have a substantive conversation with them because they're not just clicking and buying a product, but there has to be some level of active advising most often. And our most effective pre-application advising interactions come typically via phone call. But it's important to be in the other mediums too, because the email or the text may be the driver of that first contact that sets up that phone call for your first actual advising interaction. So a lot of times partner institutions will reference, other mediums or platforms outside of these more prominent bases here, social media, Facebook messaging, Instagram messaging, things like that, chat, text, everything like that. And my response to that is always, sure, if you know enough about it and you know that you are staffed to appropriately respond to prospective students in that medium, I really encourage to go as wide as possible. But you do want to keep in mind that if you are offering a medium for engagement with prospective students, you need to be able to back it up if they choose to engage with you that way. And I give this example recently of mine. It's not higher ed related, but I bought a pair of, I'm just going to say, I bought a pair of sweatpants. I wanted to update my sweatpant game recently because I'm spending a lot more time in my home, like all of us. And I bought them and I ordered a few other things with it. And I got the email confirmation that everything had arrived. And in fact, only one piece of the order was included in that, though the email confirmation made it seem like everything was included in that. So it wasn't like super easy via email how I could figure out, who I could, reach out to about this. But on their website, they had the opportunity to submit my inquiry via text. And I thought, well, this is super convenient. So I did. I just responded, included my order number in the text and my question. And they never responded via text. And I thought that this was like such a relevant example of, I didn't have the expectation that they would offer me the channel of texting to go this route, but they did. And when they did, I did have a reasonable expectation that they would respond with my expectation via text. And because they couldn't handle that internally, they ended up responding to the text the next day. It really was a bad customer experience for me. And I feel like that's a good relevant example to higher ed too, because text message, every medium that we have has a bit of a different expectation for engagement. Whether we like it or not, the expectation when we offer students the ability to text is that it's going to be a lot more instantaneous than a phone call or an email. And if we can't back that up, we should look at, what we're willing to offer our prospective students. So a lot of times we talk about goals, and as a higher education marketing and enrollment agency, we like to measure, report, and goal on everything. And in general, we're very in favor of that. But talking just about some specific goals and benchmarks that your team at your institution might want to be talking about and be looking at when it comes to the contact strategy and attempting contact and engaging post-traditional students. So overall, you want to be measuring your overall contact rate for prospective students. So do you currently do that? Do you know of X number of prospective student leads, X% end up in some type of contacted status with us. That's a really important benchmark to understand where your current performance is, because until you understand where you're currently performing, you don't understand, what's realistic in terms of setting a goal there. One relevant thing for that is I reference, the importance of measuring your overall contact rate for the contact strategy, but also understanding that there are a load of different sources that are generating these prospective students' leads for you. Maybe the leads that are coming in through your organic .edu site or your program page. You might look at this information and see, wow, we're contacting these at 60+%, some even higher than that, and that's fantastic. And you might look at your paid social and say, wow, we're contacting these at less than half that, and that's awful. But it's not. It's just understanding, what typical contact rates for your institution are associated with what source of leads, and making a goal specific to that. Obviously, our goal here is to have the highest realistic contact and application rates across all of the sources that we have. So that's how we really look about contact rates by source and overall contact rate. Another thing is looking at, how not just how many of the leads are we contacting, but how long is it taking us to do so? Is your typical contact with a new lead happening after 7 days? It might be an opportunity for you to look at how quickly or how much are we prioritizing a quick response for prospective students that come in. Typically, if you're not having a lot of success quickly there may be some opportunity to move things around and prioritize that initial outreach, getting it as close to real time as possible. So those are some of the examples of goals that we talk about when we're looking at contact rates there. The other thing that we reference a lot is that there are also technical considerations that you should discuss and look at for your own internal institution. One is, you need a CRM. And I know most of us probably are working in a CRM if we're in the enrollment, admissions, marketing space, and higher ed. But not just having a CRM, but making sure that it's optimized to prioritize new lead contact and contact attempts. So do you have automated task creation for new leads? I referenced earlier on in the slide that some of us have automated outreach attempts, others have manual outreach attempts. But if you're working in a CRM, say Salesforce, do you have it set up to where it's going to create a task at new lead creation, and that task for new leads is going to be prioritized really above every other outreach attempt? Then second, just making sure that your team that's working those outreach attempts has really clear, easy lead views, lists that prioritize new leads based off of the time that they came in, so they can prioritize getting to your newest leads as quick as possible. And making sure that in terms of the data that you do have available in your CRM, that you are consistently surfacing and making available to your teams, to your managers, to your directors of admissions, when the last attempt on certain leads and last modified dates were, so that you can, as leadership, look and provide a little bit more transparency into how well we're doing, not only at getting to that first attempt, but at consistently working through. Because as we've discussed, it doesn't necessarily mean because they request information that they're going to engage at that first response there. Obviously, there's a lot of integration that can be done with CRMs. And if you have the ability to integrate a lot of the marketing insights to look at the effectiveness of contact attempt email strategies, things like that, how often are students opening, clicking through, exploring with those emails, and embedding that into your CRM even better. So finally, an outcome of the work that we're putting into trying to get in touch and engage prospective students is that hopefully, eventually, we're going to have the opportunity to make a first personal impression with them. And this is really the beginning of the conversational strategies that it takes to convert that prospective student to a conversation, to an enrollment interview, to an application, and eventually to a student, to a graduate of your institution. So all of this could be for naught if the people who are typically responsible for having those first impression conversations aren't trained in the things that went into this contact strategy. So the first thing that we really encourage is, if you're a leader in enrollment and marketing and admissions, making sure that the team that's actually attempting these students understands the amount of work and intention and change and planning that goes into getting that prospective student on the phone or engaged via email. And then they understand some of the basics that we covered too. If you get an opportunity to engage a post-traditional student, you want to be trained to have a right conversation. What does that look like? What types of questions are we asking these post-traditional students? How are we responding in a way that prioritizes the top 3 messaging points they're likely interested in, while supplementing the conversation with institutional value propositions about your programmatic accreditation or your great academics and faculty members that are in these programs? And are there examples of training development opportunities for your enrollment or admissions staff to be more competent in these areas when we successfully get these prospective students to the point where we're having a first impression conversation with them? So in conclusion, a couple of our points. So 1, have a plan, measure it. Embrace constant change and continually tweak what may or may not work, what may drive better or softer outcomes there. Rely on messaging that is a top concern to post-traditional students, and supplement with your individual value propositions later on in the contact strategy. 4 is automate when you can, and make sure that you're performance managing through looking at the right things in your CRM on all areas, as many areas as possible. Number 5, make sure that you are not stopping after you build this great system, but you are going that final step to make sure that your people are trained to have the best conversations and the best first impressions when the outcome of this contact strategy is successful.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Chris and Amanda. We did get a question about some of the data and statistics that we shared in the report and in the session, and wanted to let you know that a lot of that data comes from our 2020 and Beyond report, which is a new survey of current and prospective students, which we just completed earlier this year. You can download that and all of our reports on our website at educationdynamics.com/insights. You'll see all of our white books and or white papers and reports and so forth that you can download there, prior webinars that you can watch on demand, and also include a link to that report on the recording page for you. So if you do have any other questions, we're happy to stick around and answer them for you. If not, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. I know you've got a lot going on right now, and appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about this. We're also happy to have a conversation with you if you'd like to learn more about what Chris and Amanda's team do to help schools increase their enrollment rates and increase their engagement rates. We're happy to have those conversations as well. So thank you very much for your time today.